Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal. Today we got yet another patch 9.2 PTR update, this time with more class iterations, some surprising class buffs, as well as more tuning for tier sets. We got a first look at the functional Shadow Priest tier set, as well as a buff to Enhancement Shamans. But rather instead of a buff, it's more like an overhaul to its playstyle, which unlocks so much potential for huge, explosive AoE damage that Enhancement has never seen before. This update has buffs as well as nerfs, like a first nerf targeting the Venthyr Boomkin playstyle, a warrior 2-piece and 4-piece tier set nerf, as well as a surprising buff to the succubus pet for warlocks, which could make it the best raiding pet going forward. So let's detail all the different changes that have happened recently. But right before that, most of you guys watching these videos are not subscribed, and the more of you I ask, the more of you subscribe, so let's keep it going. If you're watching these videos anyway, you might as well hit subscribe as well as hit the bell, especially if you want to be kept up with all the regular patch 9.2 updates going forward. First, let's start with the good news. Shamans received a flurry of updates, majority of which we covered in a recent build. A portion of this build was focused on bug fixes towards their tier sets and making sure they function consistently. However, Enhancement got the biggest gameplay change ever. They added a bonus effect to your Lava Lash. When you use Lava Lash on a target that has a Flame Shock on them, it will now spread that Flame Shock to 3 nearby enemies. The damage that Flame Shock does is by no means irrelevant. It's actually a good portion of your damage in single target. So this further improves Shaman's ability to cleave targets, especially when they're stacked in close proximity together. But it also opens up more opportunities for talents and legendaries to synergize with this portion of the Enhancement Shaman playstyle. For example, the talent of Fire Nova, which on the live servers is normally unplayable because it has no synergies attached to it, now becomes a viable choice because of this Flame Shock spread that naturally works in cleave and in big group AoE situations. Besides talents, there's even legendaries like the Lava Actuator's Lego, which gains huge value in cleave scenarios since you can spread Flame Shocks much more easily. This legendary together with the Flame Shock cleave will give you greater cooldown reduction on your Lava Lash. With a focus on a high mastery build, this could further improve on the fire damage that your Shaman does. Together with a conduit that buffs the crit chance of your Lava Lash even further, could create a very interesting fire-based gameplay for the Enhancement Shaman. In fact, many of the Enhancement Shaman's conduits have been flat out buffed with this build, like the conduit of Focused Lightning, which further buffs the damage of any ability that consumes your Maelstrom weapon stacks. This creates an obvious synergy with the Venthyr Covenant. Speaking of the Venthyr Covenant, the Venthyr Legendary also got greatly buffed with this Flame Shock change. Together with the original legendary effect, they tacked on an extra bit at the end, where the cooldown of your Chain Harvest ability, the Venthyr Shaman ability, now is reduced by 1 second for every Flame Shock that lands a critical strike. In my testing, I was able to turn this 1.5 minute CD ability into a roughly 16-second cooldown. Your numbers may vary depending on how many Flame Shock crits you receive. When you combine all of these elements together, you see probably the biggest boom in the one aspect that Enhancement Shaman suffers, which is AoE damage. A lot of Shaman Toolkit focuses on single target and has elements of cleave, but huge booming AoE can sometimes be difficult to achieve, especially in an environment where so many classes recently got uncapped AoE, where Shaman still retains a lot of its target caps, even though it has decent cleave output. Combining all these elements together, you have on-demand active Flame Shocks that are constantly reducing the cooldown of your Chain Harvest ability, which means going from trash pack to trash pack in a dungeon, you always have Flame Shocks ready to go to apply on the target. These Flame Shocks explode with Fire Nova, which does AoE uncapped damage. This combination together fills the gap that Enhancement Shamans lacked, which is the ability to do big AoE damage through a set of talents. But even outside of that explosive combo, the fact that Shamans could spread Flame Shocks easily by using Lava Lash on the target affected by the dot is already a much greater change in the whole scheme of the Shaman playstyle. Like I said before, that alone opens up possibilities for the Shaman gameplay, the talents you can choose, and the Legos you can play. There's a good chance there's going to be a lot of Shaman tuning on the damage front, because this is a huge spike of AoE damage out of nowhere, and most likely has been added to the game to make sure it works, and the damage over time will be reined back in. But the playstyle change with Flame Shock spreading is a fantastic one for certain, and if all the changes, I'm hoping that one stays in the game heading into patch 9.2. Shadowlands got an updated version of the tier set bonus. The 2-piece bonus allows you Devouring Plagues and Searing Nightmare, a chance to generate a proc of Dark Thoughts, which generates a charge of Mind Blast, making it instant cast and usable while channeling Mind Seer or Mind Flay. Every time you consume this free Mind Blast proc, you will now spawn a shade to hover over you. The damage for this shade that you summon has also been adjusted, and the shade will do constant AoE damage while it's active. For my testing, if you already have a shade active and you still get Mind Blast procs and you consume them, it simply extends the duration of your currently active shade. Also, for my testing, you can technically have the shade last for quite a while if you're getting lucky enough with those free Mind Blast procs. While the public test realm numbers aren't final, the AoE damage it provides was quite substantial, and the single target was also quite noticeable. The first class that's getting a nerf in this update is Boomkins, particularly the Venthyr kind, mostly through the changes to the Venthyr Legendary, which extends the duration of your Venthyr Covenant ability, Ravenous Frenzy, for every spell that you use while Ravenous Frenzy is out. And when Ravenous Frenzy runs out, it'll, instead of giving you 5 seconds of the copied effect, it'll be now down to 3 seconds of the copied effect. However, it's worth remembering that these changes are by no means final. They're done on the testing realm and could be reverted the next day or the next week. Though if you're wondering how this currently impacts druids heading into patch 9.2, some players have already plugged the numbers into the sims, but it seems like the Kyrian playstyle will end up being better for raiding and dungeon environment, where Venthyr will still be the strongest for pure personal gain. I want you guys to let me know in the comments below if you think this nerf going into 9.2 might be enough to drop down the Boomkin popularity by a little, since they are arguably one of the most sought after and one of the more popular DPS classes for just about anything. Another class that saw nerfs is the Arms Warrior tier set. The 2-piece got changed, where instead of providing 10% extra damage to your Warbreaker or Colossus Smash, it is now instead 5% extra damage. The 4-piece also got changed, where instead of providing the warrior through Tactician procs up to 20% constant strength buff, it is now reduced down to an 8% strength buff. Let me know in the comments down below if you think this change might allow Arms and Fury to be a little bit more competitive against one another. Do you think that this change might allow the player that plays the warrior class a bit more of a freedom of choice between Fury and Arms, or do you still think Arms or Fury is going to be one of the more dominant specs heading into 9.2? Finally, we have some surprising out-of-the-blue changes to Warlocks. For the Affliction Warlock, the ability of Deathbolt has gotten changed, so instead of doing instant damage, it instead does damage over 3 seconds. This is a direct nerf to the ability, taking away a lot of its burst capability. While the dot that it puts up cannot be dispelled, it is something that healers will have an easier time dealing with, since the damage is now spread over 3 seconds. Though since the Deathbolt becomes a dot, there are certain PvP talents and abilities that interact with it, but you won't have things like Dark Glare extending this dot by 8 extra seconds, so you don't have any what seems like broken combinations that could synergize with this playstyle. Another change that happened to Warlocks in 9.2 is a buff towards the Succubus pet, specifically 2 abilities that the Succubus can use. The Succubus is a pretty popular PvP pet because it comes with the ability of Seduction. Normally on live servers, Seduction will stop the enemy in their tracks and will use a fear-like effect to hold him in place, though this CC normally breaks to any form of damage. On patch 9.2 PTR, the Seduction ability has changed, where the target will now walk towards the Succubus slowly, and it will function more like a fear, where damage has a chance to break the CC but not always, which could synergize better into the Warlock damage over time playstyle while also displacing the target towards the Succubus. This is both useful in PvP if you want to kite the enemy away from the Warlock, and in things like dungeons and raids if you want to crowd control a target by putting it in the corner with the Succubus. Another ability that got changed is Whiplash. Normally on the live servers, Whiplash has a 6-second cooldown and will reduce the enemy's movement speed by 50%. This too can make the Succubus a preferable pet in PvP situations because the constant slows on the enemy that's chasing you can be valuable. Though on the public test realm, Whiplash gains an extra effect where it stacks up a debuff on the target, and for every stack of Whiplash, the enemy takes more physical damage from the Succubus up to a maximum of 10%. During the expansion of Legion, Blizzard standardized a lot of the pet DPS. The Succubus, the Voidwalker, the Imp, as well as the Fellhound all had relatively the same DPS when hitting a training dummy. The Voidwalker had slightly better AoE, while the Fellhunter has an interrupt. The Succubus comes with crowd control, but the Imp ended up being the most versatile since he can do damage at range. This is helpful when the boss is constantly being moved, or if your targets are always being switched, where the Imp could just hurl a firebolt at any enemy from any direction. Also, if the bosses cross any gaps where a melee pet will not be able to reach him, the Imp can cast from a distance, so he's immune to any of those mechanics. However, this change makes the Succubus a little bit better, as long as the Succubus has good uptime on the boss, since it'll do more physical damage stacking over time. Which means bosses that can immune themselves or disappear from the room or move very quickly, the Succubus will have very little advantage in those fights. But bosses that are mostly stationary, that don't really go far, that don't have any immunity phases, those bosses will be more susceptible to the Succubus damage. This is a very tiny change, but if this does go live, this will give Warlocks opportunity to really pick which pets they want for different fights, whether they need the interrupts from the Fellhunter, the versatility of the Imp, or if the boss is mostly stationary and doesn't really go far, then you can squeeze out more value out of the Succubus, which gives you more variety of different pets that are good for specific situations. And that's going to be everything that we have so far. Thank you all so much for watching this video. I do hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know in the comments what you think about all these different updates, the buffs as well as the nerfs. If you guys enjoyed this video or found it informative, give it a thumbs up. I would very much appreciate. Let me know in the comments below which class do you think Blizzard should address next, and maybe even spoil it with awesome buffs like the Shaman gotten with this update. While you're at it, if you guys are not part of the community, join the Discord link down below in every single video. Become part of the community, as that is the best place to reach me if you ever want to hit me up directly. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed, and as always, I'll see all of you guys in another video.